Well, good morning everybody. Today we're going to be making a frangipane tart, and we're going to top that with some sliced peaches and some raspberries. The basic recipe is actually very similar or almost identical to a bakewell tart, and for that we're going to need pastry and then the frangipane and some jam. And we're going to start off with the pastry. Now the full recipe will be below this video in a link to my blog, so you click on Jeff's baking blog and you'll see the recipe there, but I'll tell you the ingredients as we go along. So for the pastry we have 225 grams of plain flour, we have 50 grams of caster sugar, 100 grams of ice cold butter or chilled butter, a tablespoon of cold water and 1 egg, medium egg. In the United States that would be a large egg. And then what we do is we put the flour into our food processor. You can do this by hand, but the food processor, then you would have to rub it in with the butter. You add the butter, and if you're doing it by hand, as I say, you would rub it in, but doing it in the processor speeds it up. So you pulse it until it turns into fine breadcrumbs. Doesn't take long at all. And so then we're going to add in our caster sugar, and we'll just pass that to mix it through like that. We'll take our egg, we'll add 1 tablespoon of chilled water into our egg. Now we'll just mix that up. And we'll pour that in. And we pulse it again until it combines into a dough. And there we are. You want to stop as soon as you've got it into a dough like that. We're going to take that out, put it all together, you don't want to overwork this at all. Put it together like that, and then we'll wrap it in this cling film. And we're going to chill that for 20 minutes. Then we're going to roll it out into our flan tin. Now this recipe actually makes enough pastry and enough filling for a 28 centimetre flan tin, but I only have a 25 to 26 centimetre flan tin, so that's what I'm going to use, and I'll have some left over which I'm not going to waste. I'd actually just make a very small version of the tart separately from this. So this goes in the fridge for 20 minutes, and in 20 minutes we'll come back. So we've got our pastry, we've chilled it, and now we're going to roll it out. You want to keep this floured if you possibly can, so that it doesn't stick at all. Oops. I've got plenty, so I'm going to try and put this underneath. Like that. And then I'm going to fold it in on itself, like so. That's a bit fat there. I'm just going to roll that out a little bit more. So that then I can pick it up and drop it in, and then pull the sides up like that. As you can see, I've got far more pastry than I actually need, because as I said, this is for a 28cm tart, this recipe, and I've only got a 25cm tart tin. And then if you just do that, like that, roll it over, you'll get the excess off, and I can use this to make a smaller one later. Right, so I'm just going to roll that bit of excess off. That's a bit of fat there. Take this excess off. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put this back in the fridge for another 15 to 20 minutes. So that it firms up. Then I'm going to prick it out, and I'm going to blind bake the pastry case before we move on to the next step. Now, in preparation for blind baking the pastry case, you want to heat your oven to 190 Celsius or 170 Celsius if you're using the fan. That's 375 Fahrenheit, gas mark 5. Put a baking tray in when you put the oven on, so that the baking tray gets nice and hot, so you can place this on the baking tray when it's ready to cook. So we'll put it in the fridge for 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll come back and do the next step. Okay, so now we have our pastry chilled again, and we're going to take a fork and just prick the base all over. This is to stop the pastry from rising too much as it cooks. Okay, and then we take some parchment paper And we're just going to line it with parchment paper, just like that. And we're going to pour in some baking beans. These are ceramic baking beans, but you can use rice if you want to, or kidney beans or something like that, dried beans. It's just something which will weigh the pastry down, and as it bakes, this is called blind baking, as it bakes in the oven, the beans or the rice will get hot, and they will cook the top of the pastry for you as the bottom cooks. Now I've heated the oven to 190 Celsius, 170 Celsius fan, 375 Fahrenheit, and I put a baking tray in the oven, so that's hot as well. So now I'm going to put this in the oven and I'm going to bake it for 15 minutes. Then I'm going to take it out, remove the baking beans and the paper, and put it back in the oven for another 10 minutes just to finish the baking process. So we'll just stick this in the oven. That's going to bake for the 15 minutes, and then I'll take out the beans and I'll be back with you after it's baked for a further 10 minutes. And at that stage we're going to make our frangipane, which is with 4 medium eggs, that's 4 large eggs in the USA, 175 grams of ground almonds, 175 grams of butter softened to room temperature, 175 grams of caster sugar, and a teaspoon of almond extract to give it that extra almondy flavour. So we'll do that as the pastry cools down. So now we have our pastry case baked and it's cooling nicely, so just as it finishes cooling we can get on with making the filling. So for that, as I said earlier, we need 175 grams of softened butter. Now we can do this in the food processor without having to clean the processor since we made the pastry. It's all fine. Get all that butter off. And into the mixer. To that we're going to add our 175 grams of caster sugar, and we're going to process that until it's nice and creamy. Then to that we're going to add our 4 medium, or in the United States 4 large eggs. And mix those in. Now if it looks like it's separating, don't worry about it. Now I'm just going to check that's mixed in. And blitz it just a little bit more. Okay, now to that I'm going to add a teaspoon of almond extract. Don't use almond essence, almond extract is the real thing. And it's going to add a wonderful flavour. And with that, I'm going to pour in 175 grams of almonds, ground almonds that is, and blitz that. Until it's just combined. Yep, that's nicely combined. And then we're going to fill our cooled case. That's cooled nicely. So what I've got here is some raspberry jam. We're going to put that on the base of the tart, and then we're going to top it with our filling. Now I bought one of these squeezy ones just to make it easier, he says. Now you want a nice covering of jam, and just spread that over. I like to use an offset spatula, getting it right up to the edges so that every piece of the sliced tart gets to taste the jam as well. And the reason I'm using the squeezy one is simply, really, that it's seedless, and I prefer it to be seedless for this. Right, that's a nice layer of jam. And so the next thing to do is to spoon our mixture in. Now, and then spread it around. Now, I know I have too much mixture here. But the excess is going into the small tart that I'm also making. Right, so that's mixed in and evened out reasonably well. So then we're going to put this in the oven for 30 to 40 minutes until, touching the top, you can feel that it's cooked and nice and firm. The baking tray is still in the oven, already hot, so this will start cooking. Now if you think the pastry is cooking too much, you can actually put a pastry ring around the outside part way through so that it will stop the pastry from browning any further. Personally, I don't mind it if the pastry looks as though it's rather browner at the top than it is underneath, but some people like to have it nice and even all the way through. So this will go in the oven 30 to 40 minutes, and then I'll be back with you to finish it off with some peaches, some raspberries, glazed with some apricot jam. So I'll be back with you shortly. So now we have our tart out of the oven. I've put it onto a plate just to make it easier. I have here 1 tin of sliced peaches which I've drained. That's 410 grams including the weight of the syrup and such like. And I have 150 grams of fresh raspberries. Now you could use fresh peaches, but if you're going to use fresh peaches you have to take the skins off, and the way to do that is to put a nick, maybe a little cross shape, in the bottom of the peach and put them in boiling water just for a few minutes, and then take them out of the water and you should be able to peel the skin off. The reason I'm not using them is that I thought I'd probably mess up halving them once I'd done that. So I'm going to these sliced peaches, and you just want to lay them around the outside of your cooked tart. Like this. I'm not going to pack them in too tightly. The reason for that is that I'm not going to have quite enough if I pack them in too tightly, so we're going to change that a little bit, put them like that, move these down. Take a couple out a minute, just lay them like that. And just put a couple in the middle like that, and then just dot. Some of these raspberries are actually rather too ripe, which is a hazard we have in the UK. But very quickly after buying them you find that they're rather overripe. Now if you had the larger 25cm tart, then you'd actually need more peaches, but the amount of raspberries would fit quite nicely. I'm not going to overpack that, I think that's probably enough. So then the last thing to do is to take some melted apricot jam, and I've just melted this on the stove, maybe a couple of tablespoons full, and just brush it over the fruit to give it a nice glaze. Now if the apricot jam has bits in it, you would need to strain those bits before you glaze the fruit. Oops. So that is our apricot. That is our frangipane tart with peaches and raspberries glazed with apricot jam. quite simple to make, if a little bit time consuming, but if you decide to make it, I wish you every good luck. I'll be back soon with another recipe. Bye.